Worst. All right, come back. We're recording now. Cast.org is a wonderful resource to start thinking about ways to kind of UDLify the work that you're doing. And so I kind of got I gave you a chance to kind of dip your toes in the water in terms of the UDL exchange. There are, as you saw, hundreds upon hundreds of pre-made lessons that are already created that have UDL in mind. Now, these are all websites that, or lesson plans, you know, that haven't been tested by CAST. These are all just things that educators have posted up there. So some of them are really good. Some of them, you know, are pretty basic as well, but it's a good starting point, and it gives you some really good pointers if you want to ever build your lesson plans using that as a format, because at every turn it kind of asks you how you're thinking about kind of the connections to barriers and UDL while you're building out the lessons. It even gives really kind of cool spots to take notes. So like, these are things that I want to think about. So if you want to add those formative assessment questions in there, you can add them in the notes of the lesson plan. And you can also do, as you saw, probably some reflections that teachers made after they taught it. So like, these are the barriers I thought about. These are the ones that kind of came up. So it's kind of a cool writing tool. You're going to get used to the CU Denver template for lesson planning in this class, which I think is pretty good. I was on the team that kind of helped build it, and the ones that have been modifying it so that it's not so like the Department of Redundancy department and extra work for you all. It's pretty good. But I'm going to kind of add the caveat whenever we're doing lesson planning, and this will be for any of my classes. If you all want to dive in and try to build lessons using UDL Exchange and the lesson planning tools through here, by all means, because I think it's really good. But what I want to show you, Greg, to your point, within cast.org, they actually have a whole section. If you, here, I'll go back to the original cast.org. And if you spend time on the website, everything here is done in PDF to text you can manipulate, to audio, to, it literally has as many different ways that you can kind of work with any sort of media along the way. But if you go to news and resources and go to free learning tools, all of these things that you were talking about are in here in free version. Some of these I haven't played with, but they have the UDL Studio to make learning materials, UDL Exchange. We should almost do a session with Book Builder. I actually work with folks all the time doing professional development on how you can build stories or even have students build stories to connect to word problems or concepts in science. Actually, I'll just kind of do a quick show and tell here. And so it literally, you can make online stories throughout. Here, I'm going to do a stop share and share again, make sure you can all hear what's happening. And then the stories, you can actually go through and they will read the text
written by Gina Stefanini.
They can do, if you select words, they can actually do some language translation. They have these little kind of tutors along the way that will give you kind of hints. So I've done a lot of opportunities where I've done full word problems, and then they'll have tutors say, hey, did you think about this? And it's something that you can create to work with students.
Look at the picture and read the title. This will help you make a prediction.
So things along those lines. So there are many different types of resources. There's a kind of some math problem solving, solve it things that they do. It's a kind of a really wonderful resource. All the stuff that they have on the cast.org website. I solve it math puzzles. They had some kind of science specific stuff, but I think that they're kind of back into production trying to work on what that looks like. And so those don't seem to be available right now, but kind of a cool resource. So what I thought we might do to kind of kick things off is I want us to go back and just kind of think a little bit more about Sheep in a Jeep from last week. And so back here in our slides and everything for today, I have the lesson plan again. And again, the work that we did was around kind of lessons on pages 201 to 203, that A and B little mini lab that we did. And what I would like for us to do to kick it off for today is in pairs, I want you to take a look at this particular activity. And I want you to kind of think about the guidelines, the UDL guidelines from that lesson. And maybe what I'll do is I'll add a slide here with the UDL guidelines on them. And I want you to kind of look at it through that lens. And I want you to just think about like, how does this activity incorporate some of this, or do you have some ideas on how you might be able to kind of think about connecting to these guidelines for the activity that you did do on Tuesday? So I'm going to just add the guidelines, UDL guidelines again. So here's a link here on slide 3. That should now guess. Is everyone into today's folder? I sent out the announcement, I think, yesterday morning. Cool. So I'm going to put you off into pairs, and I want you to just chat a little bit about kind of either your thoughts on UDL in general, but also looking at the Jeep and the Sheep lesson that you did, and how you think that it either connects to UDL or ways that you think that you could improve upon that idea. I'm gonna put you all in breakout rooms, and we'll take maybe about 5 to 7 minutes to do that. So I'm opening up some rooms. Oops, there we go. So you all will be in groups of 2. And yeah, just chat a little bit. Thoughts on UDL, connections to Sheep in a Jeep.
Hey, Professor, I had a quick question.
Yep, sure, what's up?
Maybe I should save it for after class, but I didn't know, is there like incentives that school districts offer for you to like go and maybe get like a minor in Spanish or something? Like, would they pay for your school to go and do that? Probably not. Just Rosetta Stone it or do it out of pocket?
Yeah, it would depend. There might be some opportunities. There might be some opportunities to think about connections to multilingual learners in STEM. You might find some opportunities, maybe, but it'll depend on the school district.
Okay, cool.
There are definitely conferences out there around that, but it might be kind of on your own dime.
His little girl is so cute.
Hello, thank you. I'm a fan.
What's her name?
Adelaide. So she goes, we call her Addie. She's an Addie. She's at school today, which is exciting for her and us. Hey, folks. So I'd love to hear a couple of points. What so in terms of trying to connect this to making sure that we can support our students, what were some of the things that came out of that? Or just kind of any new insights on universal design?
Hannah had a really good point of understanding kind of in what way do we provide variety, like whether it would be here's one task and you have multiple ways that you could do it, or saying like throughout the course of your class you provide different opportunities for learning like on different days rather than all at once. It's like more spread out. So just kind of like the difference in that and like which one maybe is more in the universal design of learning, but that's like what we were talking about.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great thought. We're going to dive really kind of deep into that. I'm trying to figure out if that's going to be at the end of these 2 weeks or kind of at the beginning once we start getting into lesson planning. And I think it was Jesse and I last week had a really good conversation connected to this. But the way that we're going to kind of dive into that in this course is how we think about the language demands that happen in our class. And you may have noticed that within this program we kind of put a big focus on the demands of our students in terms of language, and not necessarily just students that are multilingual learners, right? We think about students with IEPs, we think about students that are kind of advanced, students that may have trouble, with attention. All of them have different language demands. Often when I do these assignments, when we dig into language demands and students are in the internships, they're like, well, this is an honors class and there are no language demands in this class. And I'm like, no, every person has some sort of level of language demand that happens that could potentially be a barrier. And the way that we're gonna dive into this, kind of like a brief, like, this is what's going, looking ahead, spoiler alert. The way that we often in STEM tend to think about language demands and how we'll look at it in this course are the different domains that students use when it's connected to language. And so when we think about domains, there are kind of 4 ways that students can access language in any activity. They can be reading, they can be writing, they can be listening, or they can be speaking. And the reading and listening are very kind of like passive ways of learning, right? And then speaking and writing are a little bit more active. And so if you're a teacher that does a lot of lecture and does a lot of talking, which of those domains are the students doing?
They're listening.
They're listening, right? So it's passive learning, if learning at all that's happening. And so kind of looking at it through that lens, similar to what you, Hannah, and Aubrey were just talking about, is, the thing that we have our students do in a lesson is probably going to connect to us as teachers having some sort of language, like connected to some domain, and as a result, narrowing the domains that our students can do, right? And so it's a really nice lens when you're building a task or building a lesson. What am I doing as a teacher? And as a result, what does that force my students to do? And how can I support them in doing that? And that's kind of a nice way to even look at the different barriers that could exist in a lesson. Is very language focused, but it's important. So that's an excellent point. And that's kind of, as I said, that's almost like, that's a nutshell my entire lesson on language demands in this class, is basically that idea, and a lens that we're going to really dive into and think about when we kind of get to the end of tasks and when we get to definitely into lesson planning. So thank you, excellent point. Other folks?
Along with what Aubrey was saying, something that I found like a little bit, I don't know, maybe like troublesome, and I don't know if UDL really wants it to be this way, but when I was thinking about trying to give options to students, I was like worried that if we give so many options all at the same time, like say you talk about a concept and then you're like, okay, we'll turn in either a picture or a writing or come up and tell me what you think about that concept. I'm worried that if you give students, options all at the same time, that students will just only pick the option that they're comfortable with every time and thus like not expand upon their skills that they have trouble with. Like say a student is really comfortable drawing pictures and not writing. Well, if you say, okay, you have those 3 options every single time, that they'll only draw that picture and never write or verbally communicate, and thus like they won't practice that and learn how to do the skills that they have trouble with.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And that's where it's going to come down to you deciding which of the tasks that you really want to allow for those options. And you can't necessarily maybe do that for every assignment or activity. But when it comes to major assignments, are you going to have to like write a paper, or are you going to have the option to maybe build a presentation or do a vlog or a podcast, or kind of opening up that along those lines tends to make a little bit more sense. The other thing that you can do is kind of say, these are the assignments throughout the semester. This is when they're due-ish. You can only do so many throughout the year, right? So you can't do every single assignment as a podcast. So you get to kind of decide, but once you use 1 or 2 of that particular one you really like up, then you've got to move on. And then you have to really think deeply of what that could even look like, just so that you're still supporting and leaving options open for students. But maybe it doesn't matter for the types of assignments you do if one person always wants to, and this is the way that they're comfortable doing it. Maybe it doesn't. So that's why you have to kind of think about, like, what are the assignments I want to actually do. And every day I'm not going to have them do that, because grading that sounds atrocious. That's just going to be your weekend gone every weekend, just focusing on, like, I have the rubric that's connected to the vlogs, connected to the podcast, connected to the presentations, and I have to go through and do like a dozen different, you'll burn out. So you've got to really kind of decide early on. And so it might make sense that in your first year of teaching, in each class, one of the assignments looks like that. And then you have that in your toolkit. And then maybe in your second year of teaching, you're like, I might expand that for 2 different other assignments, because I kind of feel good about this one. And I've made some adjustments from what I've learned from last year. Or maybe it's just another one, I don't know. But definitely don't try to implement like a million new things when you get your own classroom your first year. Survival is the most important part of that year. I saw this great Twitter post a couple of days ago, and I haven't been able to find it. I'm trying to go back and find it. The question was, I'm writing a book about all the things I didn't learn in my teacher education program. Can you list a chapter? And some of them were absolutely hilarious. I will find that before the end of this semester and share out some of the thoughts, so you all have some things to think about as you're moving through the program. And you can like needle the professors and say, I want to get to talk about this somewhere. Do it. Anyway, other thoughts. I'm digressing. What were some of the other things? Maybe anyone have a chance to talk about sheep in a Jeep? I use that as kind of like the vehicle for this conversation, but I really wanted to just make sure that we start talking about UDL. Aubrey and Hannah have had some good thoughts so far, some other groups.
I had a quick, go ahead, sorry.
You can go. It's okay. Go.
Oh, mine wasn't going to be specifically about sheep in a Jeep. I was going to just kind of ask something about what Aubrey put out there. Like, do you think it would be worth the time? Like, so the UDL principles like are kind of guided towards a task, but maybe if there's like specific vocabulary in the task that need to be discussed, like kind of use UDL principles to discuss those vocabs, like vocabulary. Like, so if you're talking about dissection, like, can you show multiple means of what dissection can mean? And, so like kids are because there was like this reading we did by Hirsch where it said, you know, background knowledge then allows the students more opportunity or better equipment to handle a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a number, I've seen that done kind of a number of really kind of cool ways. I've been in some science classrooms where a teacher will actually say, this is what your textbook says about dissection, and here's the definition. But here's another definition, and it doesn't like quite get to what I want you thinking about it, but it's still a good way to describe it. And then here's another definition that's very basic. It gets you there, but it's not enough. And then they just, in every time they do kind of in terms of language and looking at specifically about the academic language of definitions, that's how they present the material. Here are 3 kind of ways to look at it. You'll still get points for this lowest one, and it hopefully has you in your head from your own background, like you mentioned, how we've done that. It'll get you generally, but I need you to think a little bit deeper. I want to have higher expectations than that. And that's kind of cool. That, again, a lot of work to do, but you build it up over year. You do some of them along the way. And then you kind of look at multiple levels of what a definition could look like. And as you start like getting answers back from students, you all of a sudden have like years worth of people trying to divine these things, and you can pick and choose some good examples. That's one way. The other thing that I know that I really like is that people put up word walls a lot in their classrooms. And I'm seeing more folks do it in math and science. And the one thing that kind of like super irks me is that they're always just in English, always. Every single time. They are completely done in English. So a cool task in math or science could be, let's talk about the languages that exist within this classroom. Can we build? I may not know how to do it personally, but as a group, can we build? And maybe I'll talk to some folks at the school that do that, or kind of are connected to other languages and try to build word walls that are in multiple languages. Or maybe I actually just talk to my students and say, hey, can we build this as a task together? Good point. Did that answer, Austin? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, how much time as a teacher would that be considered a waste of time? Like, if if a principal walked in and instead of like doing the task, if you're like going over vocab and like, I don't know, I've never taught before, so I don't know what that would look like.
No, I mean, like language demands are going to be an important part of what you do, and part of the language demands are going to be the definitions, right? That you do, because you want to have high expectations for your students, and you want to do like think about the academic language. It's really easy, and I think we've talked about this in this class before, to kind of like, or maybe an individual conversation with someone, the idea of like this teacher guilt that you have, that you're not enough if students aren't getting to like the way that you want them to kind of get a topic. And so there's this inclination with your own teacher guilt to kind of like dumb it down a little bit, or just give the answer to them directly. But that's lowering expectations, right? There are ways to kind of like help build reasoning that don't involve trying to dumb it down. And that's connected to language. Like minus is one of the words that irks me more than anything in math, like, or minusing something, because it doesn't hold any meaning. It's a very elementary term. It's not really academic language, right? There are lots of words that we can use that are more academic language at very early ages, as like grade 1, that are better explaining the process of subtraction. And so making sure that we try not to dumb it down is important. So yeah, focusing on vocabulary is going to be a big part of what you do in math and science. It's not a waste of time. Maybe someone else, one other person?
I want to ask if we can ask the students to write their own, like, regarding to what they see, if they can add to this an extra like step, or if they want to change some steps, how it will look like and how they solve it. Can we do that and consider kind of something?
Are you talking about like a specific task, or generally?
No, like if we show them like even the sheep and the jeep or any other task, and I tell them like, what do you think you can do with this else? Can we add another things? Can you write a story regarding to what you see, which like another task with a different way? Like I can show them a video or something, and can you write a story problem like this?
You as the teacher, or have the students create?
That the students create it.
Sure, yeah, that's a great idea. Having students create problems is a really great way to get at their reasoning as well. Kind of a cool thing to do would be to pair up students and have them write their own questions connected to the thing that they've just learned, and then swap. Like create the question, create their answer, and then then swap their questions and have them. You could even do like a peer review where the students rate the other people's problems, or the original person that created the problem gets to get a chance and give feedback on the reasoning that they had. There's a bunch of different ways to go about that, but yeah, having students create is really good.
Thank you.
Right, that allows for them to kind of have their own agency in the work that they're doing. So peer review and peer work is important, and we'll get a chance later today to kind of do some peer kind of in pairs work, to take a look at our next assignment in class. Cool, thank you all for sharing. We didn't touch Sheep in a Jeep, that's fine. It was more for us to just have this conversation. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Sheep in the Jeep today, and I want us to be a little bit more focused, but I just wanted us to start thinking about the barriers that exist and how we can kind of like divert from that. And the cool thing about universal design is that it's something that came out of architecture, and it makes a lot of sense. Do we build a building and then spend an insane amount of money trying to make it compliant so that the ADA compliant so that everyone can have access to it? Or do we just like step off right from the bat and try to think about how do we make this an accessible building, and just build it that way? There still will end up being barriers, probably, but like a lot less, and a lot more manageable. One of the things that I was hoping to do with this class, that since we're online we can't do, up in St. Vrain School District, they have what's called the Innovation Center, and they and I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with it, but they actually bus students. St. Vrain is a massive district. It's from like Lyons to Erie to it's everywhere, Firestone, and they bus students into this STEM focused building, and I was hoping that we could like go up and do like a field trip up there, and we don't get a chance to this summer, but I'm trying to think about ways to build it into some other classes. And they do everything. They have students creating drones. They actually have this like $20,000 drone that was a defense company asked them to build, and it was like built to chase things. And I was like, that sounds terrible. Some defense company wants you to build a drone that can chase something. Like, what good can come of that? But it was super cool. They do all kinds of like tracking for sharks. They actually have a pre-K maker space where my daughter's gone up and like played with robots. And the way that this building was built, it is the most accessible building that I have ever been to, and that was the reason why I would like for us to talk about it, because they use this UDL focus on how to like make sure that we try to reduce the barriers from the get-go. I wouldn't say that the LSC, whenever we get back on campus, is kind of a good example of that. It's fairly accessible, but it's not the greatest. And so all of this being said, when we're building our tasks, these are the types of things that we want to start thinking about. How do we make sure that what we're building is accessible as well, for the work that we do? So when we start kind of like starting to plan for our task analysis scenario, I want us thinking about like, first, are we building a task that there are multiple ways to kind of like dive into that are fairly open-ended? And then the next thing that I want us to start doing is to think about how demanding is this task on our students? And that's where we're going to go from here. And so on Tuesday, we started thinking about like what actually constitutes a task, and then what constitutes a good task. And you all came up with some really good ideas. And then we had a chance to kind of play with sheep and the Jeep. But when we're thinking about how demanding a task is, or even just trying to choose a task, these are kind of, I think, 3 really good questions for us to dive into. First and foremost, what is the task that we're going to do? We need to think about why are we even doing this task. And once we get into a little bit into our task analysis problem, but definitely when we get into learning lesson planning, why are we doing this task? Does this task actually fit with the thing that we want our students to learn today? Because a lot of the times we could teach a lesson and say, this is the thing that's going to get me to this objective for the day. And then we find out that that's not where we ended up. So thinking in advance, again, connected to this idea of anticipation, why are we even bothering to do this task? And then how are we going to set it up? And this connects directly to kind of what is mentally required for a student to engage with a STEM related task. And that's essentially what cognitive demand is. Like, what is mentally required for a student to do the tasks at hand? It's kind of like a weird arbitrary idea. But if we have a task that's going to be definition based, right? Something almost that could be just memorized. So what is photosynthesis? What is the quadratic formula? I would argue that that's not a very cognitively demanding task. It's a pretty low level task in the grand scheme of things. Okay. If I want my students to create an entire ecosystem with photosynthesis in mind using hydroponics, it's like one of my favorite things in the world to do. That's why I came up with that example. That's a much higher level of cognitive demand compared to like a memorization task. Does that make sense? Pretty basic. And then there's all kinds of stuff that falls in between, right? There's going to be times where they have to take something that they've memorized and just utilize it. So I know what photosynthesis is, or I know what the quadratic formula is. Now use that thing to just answer like a short response question. So that's a little bit more demanding than, say, a memorization task. Or maybe I have to build something, but I still am given a lot of information in the background. Again, maybe a little bit more cognitively demanding. But again, that's kind of a little up in here. What is high, what is low? And we have a tool that we use within the School of Ed here that I think it's a lot to get used to. So we're gonna get a chance to kind of play with it for the rest of the time that we're here today, outside of doing peer review stuff that's directly connected to that. So actually, you know what I think what we might do is we're gonna open it up. So it's here on slide number 8. And so you can either pull that up, or what I might recommend for you to do, there's a folder in today's folder called Cognitive Demand, and it might be easier for you to pull up the PDF to look at because the text is kind of small. So if you just want to get a second, I'm going to guide us through just for a second. I might just pull that up as well. It's kind of a little bit nicer. Everyone there? So this whole idea of this particular matrix is for a way for us to kind of think about the tasks that we have, either the ones that are being given to us or the ones that we create, and how cognitively demanding they are. I like this. There are much simpler ways to do this, to think about cognitive demand that are focused on STEM, but I've kind of realized that I think the best way to do it is to use what is going to be expected of you in the program. And this is something that you'll use when you get into your capstone course in your last semester in your third internship. You're going to have to do a lot of work when you're doing your lesson planning. You're going to talk a lot about, like, I've built these 5 lesson plans in a row, and I've actually built the cognitive demand from the very first lesson that's going to be kind of memorizational type tasks up to them building and creating something in the 5th lesson. And so you can explain using this HES cognitive rigor matrix, these are the tasks that we've done, and you see they build on each other. They kind of increase in demand as the 5 to 6 or unit lessons or unit go. And the way that this particular matrix is organized, you'll see all of the rows are divided up into kind of on the leftmost side, Bloom's taxonomy. Is Bloom something that's kind of come up in your courses? Is that something you all have touched upon? Yes, no, maybe. So Bloom's taxonomy is essentially a hierarchy that's been created that takes objects and puts them into levels of complexity and specificity. So if you look down the side there, and this is old, this is like, by old, it's like 70s. I was born in 79, so I guess I don't want to say that it's like old, but it's been around for sure. And if you look down the leftmost column, it talks about revised Bloom's taxonomy. And you'll see in each one of these sections, the very first one says remember. So tasks that are connected to remembering. And you'll see that there are even some words that help describe, like, are we having students retrieve knowledge from long-term memory, recognize, recall, locate? So again, that idea of like, what is photosynthesis? What is the quadratic formula? And then we move up to understanding, where we're starting to construct meaning. And then we get into application style tasks, to analyze tasks where you analyze something, to evaluate, to creating. Remember, I was talking about this idea of like creating an ecosystem, creating a hydroponics something, and using some of the stuff that we've learned for our reasoning for building that. And so that down across each of the rows is a certain level of this revised Bloom's taxonomy. Have you all heard of Webb's DOK, which is called depth of knowledge? Is that something that you've touched upon? I have a love-hate with DOK, which is a whole lot more connected to hate, which is, I don't mean to make it sound that strong, but I've been involved in the process of building questions for standardized testing. I've done some work in Missouri. I've done some work in Massachusetts. Some of the M states, basically, I guess. Not Minnesota yet, though. And the way that they organize questions for standardized testing is through this depth of knowledge. And unfortunately, what they do is they're like, we need 25 questions at DOK level 2 and 35 questions that are connected to DOK level 3 and a whole bunch of level 1s. And none of them, they're all just done in isolation. None of them are connected to anything. They're all pigeonholed. And we talked about this in day 1, how like all you do in algebra is algebra. And it's not connected to the real world. It's not connected to any other classes. When you're in biology, how often do you get to connect to chemistry and physics? Somewhat, but not usually. But what use is that? How is that meaningful for students? So DOK is a really kind of a way to kind of, unfortunately, pigeonhole the work that we're doing. So that's why I'm not as much of a fan. Connected to this matrix, I kind of like it. Because now what we can do is say, let's say that I want kind of, and you'll see that they're in this organization of recall and reproduction, skills and concepts, strategic thinking and reasoning, and extended thinking. And so what you can do with this matrix is literally look at like, I want to create some sort of understanding style problem where they're building skills and concepts. And all of a sudden I can go through here and say, well, maybe what I want them to do is specify and explain some relationships between something. Or maybe I want to make them record observations of something. right? And so you can use this as a tool, or if you want to say, you know, what I really want to do in this activity for something, I want to conduct a designed investigation. Well, I know that that's having students do strategic thinking while they're applying the work that they do. So it's kind of like a cool way to kind of sit and think about it, I think. So what I think we're going to do now is give you all a chance to kind of just read and talk about it. So similarly, what we're going to do, I'm going to put you back in the same pairs that you were with earlier. You will have that up and running. And again, what I'm going to have you do is think about Sheep in a Jeep if you would like. It's kind of like a vehicle to do that. But I want you all to just kind of talk about and observe and read and think about this matrix. And then we're going to come back and we're going to start doing some applications. So if it's helpful to think about Sheep in a Jeep through this, great. If not, if you want to just talk more generally about it, also okay. Before we do that, does anyone have any questions?
Wait, what are we doing? Are we just talking about the?
Yeah, so you're gonna get into that document. And I want you to just have a chance to read it for a minute maybe, and then just kind of make some observations that you about it. If you want to use like one of the questions in Sheep in a Jeep as a way to kind of say, where does this fit? I think that would be helpful. And then we can come back and talk about that. And I would just take one of the questions from the things that you did in class on Tuesday and say, like which one of these cells in the Hess cognitive rigor matrix do I think this connects to? Sound good? All right. Rooms are open. Hey, Derek.
Hey.
Hey, folks. So I would love to hear what we learned about the cognitive rigor matrix that Hess created. There's a lot there. There's a lot in there. And this is kind of a very introduction. We're going to dive into it again here in a little bit, but I want to get your overall thoughts, especially if someone did kind of have a chance to dive into Sheep in a Jeep. What did we learn? What did we notice? What did we wonder?
Greg and I were looking at it, and we just noticed that as far as the different bloom levels, you're kind of in a different level for each category, you know, for understanding and like that. So in some areas they were kind of down towards the lower end of the bloom level, but some were more like 3. I don't think it hit in the 4th level very much, but that's what we kind of came up with.
Yeah, no, I would agree that these are definitely, and that's not a bad thing. We need all levels of questions, right? Like I think I've said this before, like we need to know some of those memorization tasks. I don't like the concept of memorization. Automaticity is kind of a word that I like to use. Like how do we have it so that we think of ways for students to reason, having things move into our brain as opposed to just like rote memorization, because that doesn't get us far. Because one of the things that you'll learn when you become a teacher is that, and I'm going to use kind of the algebra track as an example because it's kind of the one that kind of is glaring, is that you learn all of this stuff in Algebra 1. And often what really ends up happening is students memorize the stuff that they've done. And so Algebra 2 is a third to a half review of Algebra 1 as a result. In every class that I've ever been in, Algebra 2, almost half the material is just reminding them what they learned in Algebra 1 because they've memorized stuff and it's gone. They haven't thought of ways to reason to build it in, it's gone. So yeah, memorization is important. We're going to have them do it. But there's also going to be some other things that that we want to build out. We want to get to those creating. But yeah, I don't think that there's anything in the activities that you did that was them creating. Good point. Other thoughts? What did you notice? What did you wonder? Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry. I just kind of wonder if it does it count as creating that they made their own ramp or something like that? Or not really, because they followed how to make it? I don't.
So this is the thing that comes up a lot, and I'm so glad you brought that up. It depends on the thing that you want them to learn. If you wanted them to learn about ramp building, then sure, yes. And one of the things that comes up a lot, and this is a point I was we're going to do a sorting activity in a little bit in groups for math and science. And I usually bring this point up here, but thank you for bringing it up now. It's within our nature as well when we're going through and looking at the work that other teachers have done or the things that we've done to look for the good in it, as opposed to what's actually there. And when we get into lesson planning and we look at a bunch of different lesson plannings in the last 2 weeks of this, that's going to be something that we're going to have to bring up, because you all are going to have lesson plans that you're going to be given likely at some point, and you have to figure out what can I use? What do I have to adapt? And it's not necessarily helpful to try and find the good in what's there, is to actually just look at what's there. What's the reason that we're doing it? So again, coming back to the what task are you going to select? Why are you doing it? I just shook my finger. I've never done that. I can't even think of that time. That was really weird. Why you're choosing that task, and then how you'll set up the task. Coming back to those 3 questions becomes really important, because that's not the point of this. We're trying to learn about a specific idea in motion, right? And so you're creating a ramp, but does that get you any further to that idea? No. And it's a tough thing to do when you start first looking at this. You have to try and focus on. That's why I'm bringing it now, and that's why I'm having us use this tool, so that you all start thinking about it and using it now, so that you can kind of hone the way that you look at the problems that you have in front of you. So excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. Another? One more thought kind of connected to something that we've learned, because then now we're going to dive in and we're actually going to do some sorting of some tasks that you all will choose.
For the sheep in the Jeep thing, I feel like we looked a lot at the analyzing row, and it was kind of hard. I mean, Andy was kind of talking about this, but it's like kind of hard to say like, oh, from level 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the the web's level of thinking, it wasn't that different. But like, I saw us doing like the gather, analyzing, and evaluating information, which is in like the 4th column of the analyzing row, and then like, but also at the same time, like we were trying to identify patterns or trends, and like how, I don't know, what would classify in the sheep and the Jeep as like analyzing the data, or just like identifying a trend? Like,
do you have a specific question from that?
Well, even just like how you're saying, which like the very last question on the part B of the activity of, did you notice how the like height of the ramp affected how far the car went?
Right. So that's a great question. And so let's just pull it up. Let's pull that question up. It was the last question in part B. Sorry for the fast scroll, folks. How does the height of the ramp affect the distance the Jeep rolls? What is your evidence? So I kind of even argue that last part of the question definitely increases how demanding the question is, because you're not just asking them to answer the question, you're asking them to kind of use some evidence. So write the conclusion. How does the height of the ramp affect the distance the Jeep rolls? So now let's take a look at Hess cognitive rigor matrix. And so we're feeling pretty comfortable. You're saying that it fits within analyze. So what do you all think?
Or even evaluate, because it's like asking how. So maybe both. I don't know.
Well, let's for a second, let's narrow it down. Let's think about analyze just for a second. We may jump ship or jump sheep, sorry. What do you all think? I'm so sorry. What do you all think?
Well, I think that last part is definitely a way to generate a pattern, like if you're just to sit there and play with it. And if you had, if you even had 2 ramps at the 2 different heights, and then you kind of just let one go down each and then see like, oh, is there something, what's different, here? And so like you can see a pattern that, and then you could even elevate one more, kind of lower one more, and like see is there a pattern of height differential? And like, so you're kind of observing this pattern of change. And I mean, obviously you could get more complex. I don't know. I think this was like for 4th grade. So like, I don't know if you'd be able to ask students to identify variables like independent or dependent or what's a control or anything like that. But, like they could at least, I think, understand just visually that there is something changing. There is a pattern, that like if it's, less of an incline, it's going to go slower, and then the distance, would be less. And then if you increase it, the distance increases. And why is that, or at least understand that that's happening.
Yeah, you bring up another really important point. The level that the student's at is going to probably affect where this fits within the matrix, right? So if this is a 4th grade question, we're we know for sure it's going to be kind of much higher in terms of connecting to the cognitive demand that's necessary compared to you all doing it. It's just going to be different. You might have already known a formula that you could use to connect to this. And if that's the case, all you're really doing is using a formula to come up with an answer. Maybe you could argue. And this isn't supposed to be like there is a right answer in any way, shape, or form. It's going to be kind of how you use this tool to make sense of it yourself. So all 10 of you could have come up with something fairly different. Most people have the answers have been somewhere within Analyze and DOK level 3. Most of you have kind of like argued for different areas within that. And that's fair. I think that that's a pretty good spot to put this for a 4th grader, but it's going to depend on your grade level. It's going to depend on who your students are. The idea of this is for you to just be thinking and realizing, again, coming back to like universal design and coming back to this idea of making sure that there are multiple entry points and the things that you're doing, or even the language demands conversation we had a little while ago. What are you doing and why are you doing it? And those 3 questions. What are you doing and why are you doing it? And does it make sense in this context? It's just a tool to analyze. It doesn't have to be like this is the right, this is the left. And again, this is the first time we've looked at it. There's a lot of stuff in here.
Well, and so like with that, like, so, you know, we would probably say that mostly they are probably operating in that level 1 as a 4th grader, right? Because they were putting it down on the chart. But, you know, you could argue that they're kind of at that 3rd, if they were to generate a pattern. It's like, would you cross kind of things? Obviously, you wouldn't expect them to do like this, making graphs and whatever. But, you know, like if you could at least identify like, hey, you're having this higher level of thinking within this context of what we kind of need you to be at, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to look at it. Cool. I want us to play a little more. So we're going to do 2 more things. I was kind of hoping that we could start sharing our journey maps today in class, but I think I want to also kind of privilege some time to do some peer review. And so we're going to do 1 more activity, and then we're going to kind of like wrap up for the day in terms of like the class time stuff. And then I'm going to put you into pairs so that I have a short little way to kind of think about our next assignment and ways that we can kind of do some peer review and just get a chance to share our ideas thus far. And so that's what we've got left for today. But what I want us to do is I want us to do 1 more activity kind of connected to this to kind of still continue to delve into it. And so we're going to do a little bit of a sort. I'm going to put you all in math and science groups. I switched them up a little bit from the last group. And what we're going to do, and so for the science folks, you'll see within the cognitive demand folder, there's math group 1, science group 1, and science group 2. For the science folks, what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at, since what's coming up, we're going to start connecting what we're doing in tasks to standards. I want to show you some actual standardized testing questions that are out there. The one that I like using are the ones from Massachusetts, the MCAS testing scores. They have some pretty interesting ones that exist, and they actually have all of their library of standardized testing questions out there. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to just see what's out there and let you all see what's available. And so you'll see in the science, I have the science, tech, and engineering ones. You're going to be specifically looking for some ones that are constructive response. And what I want you to do, you can click on them right here, is to choose, let's go with 2. I was initially thinking 3, but I want you to choose 2 problems. Make sure that you kind of connect to the 2 that you want them, you just so that you can maybe take a screenshot or just take note of what they are for kind of sharing when we come back. And I want you to just pick 2 of them, and I want you to, as a group, try to like figure out where you think that they fit within within the cognitive rigor matrix. And so we're gonna try to do this for about, I'm gonna say 10 minutes for that. For the math group, I chose 8th grade math. And similar, you're going to go through and you're going to look through and choose 2 that are connected to the constructive response questions. And similarly, I want you to just take a look at them and say, where do you think that this fits in terms of levels of cognitive demand? Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about the task at hand? I'm gonna need just 2 seconds here to assign these breakout rooms as I have them, and then I'll send you off. All right. And so when you head out there, just remember that you'll have your own page to look at and kind of take some notes in. All right, you're all assigned and they're opened. As I said, I'll give you kind of a 1 or 2 minute warning, but let's try to do this in about 10 minutes because I want to have a little chance to chat and then we'll go through and do the work that we have to do.
I left the room, leave, yeah. Leave. No, no.
Hello. We're getting there. Most people are back. Okay, let's do it this way. I'd like to hear from each group. Did you all get a chance to at least get into one of the problems and make some decisions on where you think it might fit somewhere within the cognitive rigor matrix? Okay. So what we might do, maybe we'll start with Team Hannah. If one of you could actually share the screen of one of the problems that you had a chance to talk about, by looking at the bottom on the green, the share screen option, just so that it should be available for you to be able to share. And then I'd love to hear you all kind of guide us through one of the problems and where you think it fits.
I'll share if, yeah, I'll share.
Great, thank you.
Okay, everyone can see this one. Good, okay.
I can see it.
So this, one of our questions is showing like a picture of like plates in the ocean, tectonic plates, and then the questions are, for these, mostly the questions are like based on either identifying or describing, and we thought that that kind of goes into the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, like memorization. Because I mean, to answer these questions, it would be like, well, remember what you learned about in class, and then just regurgitate, you know, a geological feature or the action that happens when plates like slide together. We thought that the highest like level that this gets to is in part B, where explain why this happens. You would have to like understand a little bit more than just like the bare bones of the process. So we thought it's either applying or at like the highest or really understanding.
Cool. It's amazing how just adding explain why or why at the end of a question that first says to describe can change the cognitive demand level of a problem. So kind of when you think about if you're just giving curriculum, really great point. By adding a word like why can completely change the landscape of a problem in a really easy way if you don't have a lot of time to do so. Cool. Thank you for sharing.
No problem. How do I stop? Okay, there we go. Hold on. Stop.
Yeah. Let's do math team next. Do you all have one that you'd like to share? Choose someone to share screen, or at least talk through the problem, and then I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts.
I can do it.
Thanks.
So let me see how to share. We did like a problem that had multiple parts. So
if you even just want to talk about one of them.
Oh yeah. So even it just like looking at this graph, you have to write a function and like identify or like explain how you got an answer like by evaluating what's on the graph. So we kind of said that was in the understanding and applying, because you're applying your knowledge of like how lines and graphs work and trying to write equation or trying to like identify what the answer is. And then the explaining part is like where you would probably go into more of the applying your information and everything. But that's what we were like kind of in the second and third level of the Bloom's taxonomy stuff.
Great. Cool. Thank you. I think that makes perfect sense. And what about Team Lindsay? Sorry, I'm like picking on one person.
That's fine. We actually picked the same one as the geology one. That's my fault because I saw it and I wanted to do it. But I can.
I
still
realized
share
that that was kind of a potential issue, but I'd love to hear your all thoughts. That's great. That's interesting.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So we kind of talked about the same thing, how it was basically you have to kind of recall things. It was kind of just regurgitating, kind of just like Hannah said. It shows a diagram, which is kind of nice when it says identify one geologic feature. For this, I didn't really like this because there is a right and a wrong answer. As we were discussing it, Austin was like, oh, that's mountains, right? I was like, actually, no, it's the opposite. It's trenches. And so I didn't like that there's, I don't know, no room for like interpretation there. I guess when
that's kind of a pretty low level problem.
Yeah, definitely. And then for part B, it says describe what happens. So again, that's a little bit more regurgitating the information. But like we said earlier, when it says describe the process, that's where I feel like the question dives a little bit deeper into like, you kind of also, you have to apply like different like physical sciences to answer that question. So yeah, I mean, the highest level that we got to was like, I guess analyze, and it was like level 3 with just interpreting the model. Yeah, that's about where we were.
Cool. I think that makes sense. What did you all think about the problems that you saw? These are going to be fairly similar to the types of things your students will see when they have to do standardized testing. Although wouldn't it be this wonderful world where when we come back to the point, we decide that it's not the best way. Although I read something on Chalkbeat yesterday or last night that had my blood boil, that there are some groups in Colorado that are really pushing to start the year out in the fall with standardized testing so that we understand where students are at their lack of understanding because of what happened with the pandemic. So we want to just like start the year off with standardized testing, which I pray that it's just this advocacy group and that it doesn't actually go somewhere, and that we're just going to increase standardized testing to make sure that teachers are accountable because of we don't have them focused in class all the time. We can't control what teachers are doing and what students are doing. That terrifies me. But that was something that had me pretty heated last night. I might even add that article into our face-to-face section for today. Just, I don't know, not to make other people's blood boil, but just kind of connected to things that we need to be thinking about. But what did you think of the questions?
Can I ask a quick question about the questions, actually?
Of course.
So one of them was like, describe like the pros or cons of this specific action. And I was thinking about applying Bloom's taxonomy to that, because it's like, well, that kind of involves evaluating why like something is a pro or a con, but also couldn't you say that's like memorizing? Because like, I mean, in a class, if you talk about it, the question was like artificial selection, the pro or the con of artificial selection. And it's like your teacher will tell you though the pros and the cons of artificial selection. So isn't it like you could memorize what your teacher said and write that down? I mean, or you could come up with your own pros and cons. So like what is that? Because those are two vastly different like areas of cognitive difficulty.
My thoughts on like a pro and con type of thing is that it's fairly low level, because it could just be memorization. At the most, a question like that could be, I have a procedure to figure out if something is a pro or a con, and then I'm going to use that procedure to just put it in a place. That's where my mind would go with it. I would say it's fairly low. Maybe depending on how you answer the question, it involves them trying to like analyze some information to sort, kind of like what I had you do in this activity. it wasn't quite a pro and con, but I had you sort into kind of like a couple of different piles. And so you could make a couple of different arguments about where that fits in terms of cognitive demand. Since this is the first time you all looked at it, at this idea, it might be a little bit higher, maybe. But you have to kind of, again, think about the context. But I would say generally, if you just like list the pros and cons, it's pretty low level. If it's Googleable, then I would usually say kind of low.
Well, because I was thinking, you know, there's a difference between just like outlining, oh, I mean, it's a pro because it's a pro because it costs less money to do this. But then, you know, going further and saying why that would be a pro also kind of expands the cognitive difficulty.
Yep, that totally changes it. If you have to give your reasoning, then that 100% changes it. Right, that idea of like, I add why to the end of the question, that automatically changes the question. Thank y'all. So this is kind of our foray into this, and it takes a little while, I think, to dive into it. But I wanted to make sure we had a chance to, because for our online for the weekend, I don't know if you had a chance to look at this yet. I want to kind of, I decided instead of trying to go off on a tangent to build something new, that we would do something that furthers your discussion of the current assignment we're working on. I just thought that that was a better use of our time. And so what we're going to do for our online for Sunday is you're going to share your task, which you're going to get a chance to talk about in peers right now when I let you all move off. And what I want you to do is I want you to post it. I want you to think about where it fits within the Hess cognitive rigor matrix. And what I want you to do, and this is kind of a little bit of a push because we're going to start diving into this, what standard do you think it actually covers? And so you'll have kind of from this week a list of where you can find the standards. You can also find them here. I have the NGSS ones and the Common Core standards here. Here's my recommendation for this. And again, this is just taking a stab at it so that I can give you some feedback. What I would like you all to do, like as I'm talking right now, is to take out your phones, if you have a smartphone, and download either the Common Core app or the NGSS app. Because what you can actually do once you open up that app is type in, say that you're doing something about ratios. You can just type in the word ratios and it will pull up every standard that exists within that are connected to ratios. Or if you want to talk about hydroponics, if you type in the word hydroponics into the search, it tells you all of the content standards. And so what I want you to do is to just take a stab as the last thing that you do at where you think that this fits within standards. We're going to have a nice conversation about standards and dive into it, but I want us to just take a look at like the things that we're going to be facing when we start thinking about tasks and then lesson planning and when you have your own classroom. And so that's what I'm asking of you all for our next online session. Any questions?
I have a question about the app that you said. There are many apps. When I go to app stores, it says iExcel or just like Common Core standards. So which one is the best that you prefer to?
And so the last thing I want to do, I'll just kind of do a quick little search here. So the Common Core standards for math app looks like this. I'll show the Apple one, but they all look the same.
Yeah, okay.
It looks like that. Yep.
Okay.
And
cool.
the next generation standards looks exactly the same. It's just a different color.
Which is NGSS for math. Okay.
And so it looks like that. It's just a different color.
Okay, I got it.
It's a helpful tool. So the math one is the Common Core one, and the NGSS one is the science one. So the math folks only need the math one. The science folks only need the science one. But if you want to download them both, they're fun. Kind of fun to tool around. So it's just kind of like a bit of a stretch, starting to think about like, how do we connect the things that we want students to learn to something? Like, what is the overarching idea that we really want them to learn? And then I can give you specific feedback on kind of how our thoughts are, and then we can use that as a conversation starter. Sound good? So with the remaining time, I want to get a chance for us to share with each other our ideas for our projects. And so I have some ideas, kind of the peer review pairs slide, which is slide 11. I have some things that we can start to think about and kind of give each other feedback. And you can go any direction you want, but I want you to think about like, maybe like, what is the overarching idea? What's the thing I want them to get out of doing this task? So what's the intended thing? If you've actually done the task already with someone, what did they actually learn, and what's different between the two, or what do you think they'll learn? And then just in general, what kind of advice you give each other on the task or what you've done so far in the activity. So we've got 15 minutes left. You all don't have to come back once you're done. Move on with the things that you have to do, and then